Hello, 8th graders. This is your vocab video for the community words. So, as I go through the words, I'm going to have you please go through your worksheet and fill out the different parts that need to be filled out. So, our first word is our unit word. This is community. This is a group of people living in the same place or having a particular characteristic in common. So Danville is a community, but also other things like hunting or soccer or running or many other things can be considered communities as well. So definitely towns, cities, a whole state could be considered a community, but also other groups of people can be considered a community as well. The next word is incarceration. So this is the state of being confined in prison or in jail. Another word for it is imprisonment. In our book, Arthur was incarcerated in juvie for, I think it was 3 weeks. So that is incarceration. Juvenile. So juvenile is just a young person. And this is not to be confused with juvie, which is juvenile hall or a juvenile facility, which is a jail or a prison for kids. Redemption is salvation from sin or the payment of an obligation. It is also making up for the bad things that you have done. In our book, Arthur is getting redemption for throwing the brick at the junk man by working for the junk man. A delinquent is a young person who regularly does illegal or more immoral things. I wouldn't say that Arthur is a delinquent because of the regularly part. Arthur has done one crime, they don't mention anything about him doing other crimes, but a delinquent is someone who regularly commits crimes. Probation is the release of an offender from detention subject to a period of good behavior under supervision. So Arthur is on probation and has a probation officer, and he has to meet with her every so often to make sure that he's not doing anything wrong. Probation officers can be pretty strict. They come to your house and they can like drug test you or like test you on, what you've been doing. And everybody's probation is a little bit different based on whatever crime they did. A bailiff is an official in a court of law who keeps order and looks after the prisoners. This is often a police officer, as you can see. This is a person that leads them up to the bench to testify. A felon is a person who has been convicted of a felony. We talked about this in class a lot. Felonies are larger crimes such as murder, rape, robbery, theft, arson, which is setting fire, forgery, kidnapping. This is opposed to a misdemeanor. A misdemeanor is a smaller crime, something smaller that's not as bad or negative. So a person that is convicted a felony is called a felon. Unfortunately, felons have a really hard time later on after they've committed a felony. They can have a hard time getting a job or getting into school, and they have a hard time after this. A Samaritan is a charitable or helpful person. You've probably heard Good Samaritan before. In the book, after Mr. Hampton falls over because of the brick, being hit by the brick, a Good Samaritan comes by and helps him up and kind of saves him and brings him to the hospital. Fiction is any narrative or book or novel, story that consists of imaginary people, events, or descriptions. In other words, it's a narrative that's not based strictly on history or fact. I always tell kids to think of fiction as fake. Those letter F's should give you a hint as to which one it is. Nonfiction is writing that is based on facts, real events, and real people, such as a biography or history. Nonfiction deals with real people, places, and events. It's the opposite of fiction, and they also teach, inform, and explain real things. Figurative language is when you use a word or phrase that does not have its normal, everyday, literal meaning. So it's when you use words in a different way than what they're usually used as. There are a lot of different types of figurative language. There's alliteration, metaphor, simile, hyperbole, personification, and onomatopoeia. Our next word is metaphor. So a metaphor is a direct comparison between two things. In class, I've used the examples of it's raining cats and dogs. I said, you are my sunshine. You are the apple of my eye. It's comparing one thing to another without using like, as, or than. This little image says, you ain't nothing but a hound dog crying all the time. So this person is calling a person a hound dog because they cry a lot. So it's poetically calling things something else. The kind of opposite of that is a simile, and these are comparisons using like, as, or than. So some examples are cute as a kitten, as cold as ice, blind as a bat, as sweet as sugar, or like two peas in a pod. Her eyes shine like the sun. Your socks smell like a dirty old dog. And your key here is to look for those words. And similes use like, as, or than, and metaphors just straight up compare two things. To help you better understand this is a nice chart, I think, to show the difference between similes and metaphors. So a simile, her heart is like gold. A metaphor would be her heart is gold. The simile would be the world is like a stage. The metaphor would be the world is a stage. He eats like a pig, and he is a pig. You are like a rock, and you are a rock. Here's mine. Your eyes are like sunshine, and you are my sunshine. And then poor as dirt and sea of sand. Those are some examples of how those are different. Imagery is our next word. Imagery, I think of the word imagine. You can imagine pictures of what you're reading and see different images in your mind as you're reading. Imagery often also relates to the five senses. So envisioning what you read, smelling those smells, tasting the tastes they're talking about, and so on. Personification is giving non-human objects human characteristics. So, for instance, the flowers danced in the breeze, the wind whistled throughout the day, and one look at the garden and you could tell that the plants were begging for water. So, all of these things don't actually have these human characteristics, but through personification, they do have these human characteristics. A protagonist is a leading character or the main character in a drama, movie, novel, or other text. Arthur, obviously, is our protagonist. Also, Shrek, Harry Potter, and Simba are some examples of protagonists. There's many other examples you could go through. The opposite of that is an antagonist. This is someone who opposes or is hostile to someone or something. This is kind of the bad guy or the enemy, also called an adversary. In our book, I think Arthur's self, where he threw the brick at Mr. Hampton, kind of is the protagonist. And also we have Lord Farquaad from Shrek, we have Voldemort, and we have Scar as well. Characterization. This is the creation or construction of a character. This is bringing characters to life through writing. And there's two kinds of characterization. There's direct characterization, where the author just states what the character is like. And then there's indirect characterization, which is when the author makes hints through dialogue, through other descriptions, through their speech, through their looks, about what they are like. So not as obvious when it's indirect characterization. Plot is the main events of a play, novel, movie, or a similar work. There's a beginning, middle, and end. At the bottom, you can see the plot map, and you can see how the story continues. There's always some rising action, which leads to the climax or the highest point in the novel or book. It's kind of the turning point. Then there's some falling action that happens after the turning point, and that ends in our resolution or ending. A conflict is a struggle or an opposition or a problem, really, between two characters or people. There are 6 different types of story conflicts. There's person versus person, where two people are fighting. There is person versus society, where maybe a person is embarrassed or shamed by society or struggling with society's view of them. There's person versus nature, where maybe a natural disaster has happened and a person is fighting against this natural disaster. Person versus technology, it could be something science or technology related that is getting in a character's way. Person versus self, that's fairly obvious, it's against themselves. And person versus the supernatural, that has to do with fantasy and sci-fi texts. Being against, like, Pennywise in It is an example of person versus supernatural. The resolution, we kind of already talked about this, so this is an easy one. It also says the word in the word, which I like about this one. This is how the story is resolved or worked out. It's the ending. Either it's a good ending or a bad ending, but there is sort of an ending to every story. Theme is an idea that keeps coming up in a work of literature. It's the message or the moral or the big idea. Some of the examples are treating others fairly, making good choices, believing in yourself. For Arthur, the big idea or lesson is redemption, which we've already talked about. Let's see, family, friendship, teamwork. There's lots of different themes that books follow. Our next one is sensory language. Sensory language is language that connects to the five senses: sight, sound, smell, taste, and touch to create an image or description. And it really has to do with descriptive details and language. We're going to skip illusion because it's not on your list this time, but we're going to go straight to foreshadowing. So, foreshadowing is a literary device by which an author hints at what is to come. In these pictures, you can see that this caveman is, there's some foreshadowing that he eventually is going to become a technology driven current man. And then I thought this one's kind of funny. There's a hole coming up. We got a little foreshadowing that there's a hole. In a book, it's more about giving little hints about what the ending is going to be all about. Our last word is point of view. I believe I got all of them. Point of view is the perspective from which a text is written. It's who's telling the story, who's narrating it. There are lots of different point of views. There's first person point of view, which uses the words I, me, my, mine, we, our, and ours. There's second person, which you don't see a lot. You see you or yours. You see this in like instruction manuals. You also see this in the Choose Your Own Adventure books. I'm not sure if people have read those, but you choose a option at the end of each chapter of like where you're going to go in those books, and it's all written from the you perspective, which is kind of an awkward one. Third person is he, she, it, they, character names instead of I. We see this a lot. I'd say first person and third person are the most common. Third person can also be broken down even more into third person objective and third person omniscient. So there's a lot of different point of views, but we're going to stick to these three for now. That is about it for your vocabulary. If you could please make sure that you go through the video, you get all of your questions answered, and do your worksheet, and then study for our test, which is coming up. Good luck and great job. Thanks.